Welcome to this afternoon's session. Just by means of introduction, my name's Dan. I'm a director in Health Lab, and I have the pleasure of leading a slightly crazy team called People Powered Results. And my colleague Catherine, do you want to say hi? And Catherine and myself and the team have been working with various systems over the last few years to help bring about change, people-powered change. And we're going to spend the afternoon kind of discussing the question that we posed for everyone here actually is, people-powered change, how do we make it stick? And I think there's something quite interesting is when you ask quite a broad but pertinent question, you tend to attract quite a big crowd. So I think this session was oversubscribed in about 15 minutes from this morning, so it's great. And just to, I guess, manage expectations, I think it's the type of question that maybe we're not going to get the answer to today, but if we can actually share the collective wisdom that is in this room, 150 odd people, I think we might make some progress. But before we go into the detail of the question, I just wanted to take a bit of a step back and maybe share some reflections over this morning, but what do we mean by people-powered change before we try and answer how we make it stick? And I guess I was quite struck by some of the presentations this morning from Jen and Mo and Sharon about a lot of the ideas and innovations that we've been talking about this morning focus on enabling people, patients and communities to take more control and more control of their health and well-being. But I think we also recognise, and I think my challenge around some of that is there's lots of ideas and innovations that play to that theme, and that's really important. But we also need to recognise that we're operating, particularly in the health system within the UK, with a pretty challenging context and environment where we know demand is rising, becoming more complex, and there's financial pressures in every system and performance pressures in every system. But equally, the flip side of that is there's lots of amazing, passionate people working in the system, delivering amazing care to people and communities. And I think for us in the People Powered Results team, we recognise that actually the way we bring about change in complex systems such as health, it's kind of missed an essence of that. And actually, how do we start to play to that asset that is within the system and start to bring a focus on people? Because quite often you can have the best idea and innovation in the world, but unless we start to give, and I think this is our belief in People Powered Results team, give a focus on the fact that change and innovation is as much about engaging, mobilising, organising passionate people to bring about that change. And that people-powered health system that we've been talking about this morning, then that has to be part of the answer. Does that make sense as the context for the question that I think we're trying to answer? And are people in the right room, I guess? Algorithmic medicine is next door. And we've been lucky enough to work with some amazing people over the last couple of years. From the very heart of NHS England to parts of Essex and all over the country. And actually we thought it'd be quite interesting to bring those people, those passionate individuals together to share their experiences and their reflections and maybe help see if they can answer the question for us, in effect. So we're going to talk to them and ask them to share their experiences of people-powered change and how to make it stick, and understand what gets in the way, but also what helps with some of that. Catherine.
Great. So to kickstart the conversation, can you just give us a wave if you're one of the people that are going to be sharing at the outset?
Do you want to stand up, actually?
Yeah, stand up, more obvious. So as Dan said, we've invited a range of people who are the change makers, I guess the troublemakers that Jen Hyatt referred to this morning, that are really, striving to create change in their fields of influence, the local areas, the organisations that they work within. And they span all parts of the system, all parts of the country, and bring a range of different, but we hope really valuable perspectives. So we're going to start by inviting each of them to, in 1 minute, attempt to answer the question, people-powered change, how do you make it stick? And apologies for the spoiler, guys, but the answer is we don't really know the answer. And I guess also there's not one single answer. What works in one place might not work in another, and context is very important. And we'll dive into the detail of that in a minute. Because we've only given them a minute, I am going to introduce them myself so they don't spend 30 seconds of their time telling you who they are. So if you can just jump up when I say your name. So to start with, we've got Chris Easton, who heads up strategy development within Tameside and Glossop Integrated Foundation Trust. And Chris has also been the self-care policy lead within NHS England. We were then going to go to the empty seat next to Joe, Dan Doherty, who's the Integrated Director of Clinical Commissioning within Essex. Unfortunately, Dan was pulled into a meeting due to a crisis within the system, which says something in itself, but sent Dan his answer, so he'll read it out on other Dan's behalf.
And it involves beer, funny enough.
It involves
so
craft beer, yeah.
it's worth sharing.
We've then got Gemma Clifford, who is the lead for integrated personal commissioning within Stockton and sits within the voluntary sector. We've got Joe Fitzgerald, who's a national advisor for NHS England on co-production and how we put people at the centre of everything we do, and also co-founded People Hub, that are lead work in this area. We've got Katie from NHS England, Katie Robinson, who's the deputy director within the strategy group. We've got Louise Hall, who has worked in many roles in transformation across West Essex, but I think currently is the deputy director of transformation within West Essex CCG. We've got Matthew Dolman, who is a local GP in Somerset, first and foremost, also sits on the CCG and is also the clinical lead for the STP, the Sustainability and Transformation Plan footprint across Somerset. A man of many roles. And then last but by no means least, we've got Rich Watts, who is an advisor on the Integrated Personal Commissioning Programme within NHS England. So as I said, we're going to give everyone 1 minute to talk. We're then going to pause and actually allow you a bit of time to, chat, process, digest some of what you've heard with the people immediately around you, and hopefully come up with some really crunchy questions that you want to put to the group. So please don't hold back there. And I guess we recognise that lots of you in this room bring a heck of a lot of expertise in this area, probably different perspectives to add in. So we're really keen just to start facilitating a bit of conversation and debate. With the aid of, you'll see these kind of orange blocks in the middle, which are essentially spongy microphones, which we can chuck around. You should have on each of your seats as you've walked in a piece of paper. So, realistically, we're not going to have time for all of the questions in an hour. It's a relatively short session. So please do jot your questions down and we will gather these and aim to kind of refer and come back to them. I think I've been talking for enough time. So
that's over a minute, Catherine.
Over a minute. Chris, over to you to kickstart us.
Okay, that is definitely working.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to give some reflections on my experiences of working in an acute trust for the past 18 months, trying to drive people-powered approaches, and just pick up on 6 key areas that we've really tried to focus on. Firstly, there's something for me about language. We have asset-based approaches, we have person and community-centred approaches, we have social movements, we have people-powered health. All of those things lack a precise definition and make it difficult for people to engage with. We need a clear language, clear understanding of what that means. We need to make the case. We need to make the case economically. We need to make the case in terms of benefits for people, for members of the public. We need to present this in a way the workforce can understand. I think there is something not just in how do we make these approaches stick. I think there's something about why haven't these approaches stuck already. None of this is new, and I think some of that is in the way we explain it. Leadership needs to give permission to people like me to do crazy things. Lots of this feels very uncomfortable to the health service, a system that traditionally works in quite linear ways, likes cause and effect, likes to be able to attribute the outcome to the intervention. People-powered approaches don't work like that. So we need to become comfortable with the messy and things that can't be easily counted. We need to genuinely and authentically shift power to communities. We can't own this agenda as the state. If we do, it doesn't work. We pollute it. And I think we need to very genuinely and authentically work collaboratively, recognise the brilliance of the health system, but also recognise its deficiencies as well. Recognise that the vast majority of the things that affect people's health sit outside the control of the health system, and we need to embrace that and work with it. We need to capitalise on friendly antagonists. I think that's what you refer to as troublemakers. I prefer friendly antagonists. There's somebody in every system who is willing to prod in a very friendly way to remind people there's a different way of doing things and try and move this agenda forwards. We need to find them and capitalise upon them. And finally, we need to think really, really big. People-powered health, person and community-centred approaches cannot be something the system does alongside what the system is. This has to become the new normal. The population that we have, the population that we need to work with, has different needs, different demands to how the health service continues to be configured. So this has to be the way things are. This has to be what we become.
Actually, so I kick-started that. We won't have time for claps for everyone. We'll do a clap at the end for everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Over to Dan on behalf of Dan Doherty from Mid-Essex.
Is the Director of Commissioning in Mid-Essex, but he's also a leader within the Success regime, which covers a much bigger part of Essex. And he sends his apologies. He's been pulled into lots of NHS England meetings quite urgently, late last night and this morning. But he sent a really interesting analogy. And I'm going to read it just on my phone, so apologies if I'm looking down. So he says, so I gave the question some real thought. I know we only had a minute, but it's not an easy question to answer. I think we've acknowledged that. But his thought came over a couple of beers, as most of his thoughts do, as he said. So he was out with a lad from rugby who runs a microbrewery in Malden, where he lives. He started talking about beer, and I pointed out the fact that these days, it's nearly impossible to get a cheap pint. And lots of stuff that is available is kind of this continental Pilsner that's flavoured with light cheese and developed by microbreweries. And for him, that provoked a thought. And it's the fact that the craft beer movement has won. So we've shifted from this kind of bland beer to lots of different varieties and different flavours that is all locally brewed. And his thought was like, actually, how's that happened? It's almost a movement that's happened in itself. So he asked Mike, his friend and local brewer, what their secret was and how they've gone about it, because they haven't achieved it in the CCG, despite numerous attempts. And he didn't expect his answer, but it made sense. He said he didn't focus on the change per se, but on creating the environment to allow the change to flourish. He felt there was always a subculture of brewers and real ale aficionados desperate to bring about change, but the structure and the construct of the environment prevented them from achieving it. CAMERA, who's an organisational body, didn't try to change everyone's behaviour, but they worked on the conditions, so altering legislation, taxation, quality measures, and by creating that environment, allowed the change to flourish. They allowed the masses to bring about the change and make it stick. So he comes back to the question, so how do we make people-powered change stick? Perhaps we don't try and force through the change. Perhaps we focus on creating the environment to allow it to flourish. The people will tell us what to change. The people will tell us how to change it. We just need to create the construct to allow it to happen, which I think is quite pertinent to some of the challenges we've been talking about this morning and that, Chris, that you've mentioned.
Great. Gemma, over to you.
So just to share a few reflections of some of the work that we've been doing with the People Powered Results team up in Stockton. And one of the things that's really key, it reiterates some of what Chris has already said, is around that consistent language, but actually across senior leaders. So we've got better care funds, we've got IPC, we've got transforming care, new models of care. Actually, what we're all doing is the same. So let's kind of stop using all the different wording and actually have a consistent language so we're saying the same message. And within that, one of the things that we've realised is that actually we need a kind of a cohesive joint learning agenda that reflects all of that work. And it's something that we can actually shift from paper into practice. So it's not just something that we all kind of nod and agree to, but actually how do we move that into practice? And one of the key things as well from our perspective is identifying real key frontline champions on the workforce and use these as change agents, and they are can-doers that will go out and will test things. But equally, you've got to give them permission to go out and test. So from a senior leader, perspective, give that permission out to people. And in that way, we can then breed and grow wider system leaders, because it's the only way that we will, encounter any real change. And these wider system leaders are not just in the health system, in the social care system. Look outside of that, look at the voluntary sector, look at people with lived experience, make those our new generation of system leaders. And finally, just to kind of end one of our exec team, what she described is under the rock, we know it's all quite messy under the rock. And what we have to do is we've got to lift that rock up, which is kind of where we are in Stockton at the moment. But the problem is once you lift the rock, you can't put it back down again. So we've got to be brave enough, lift the rock up, look at what's under there and then start to deal with it.
Who put the rock there in the first place?
We didn't go as far as that, Neil.
Thanks, Gemma. Katie, over to you.
So I've got three things that I thought have particularly come out from the work that we've been doing. First is making sure that there's a connection between the national priorities and the issues we're trying to deal with, translating that into the local priorities, but then actually connecting that to the issues that frontline teams are actually facing so that it makes it real to them. Co-production, so making sure that we're building proper relationships across the local systems. By that, it's the professionals, both the clinicians and the non-clinicians. It's outside the health system, making sure that's linked into what patients are saying and that we're linking that back up. But then also that connection back up to the national team so that we can take that on board as well. And I think similar to what other people have been saying, really empowering people to try things out, to use their ideas. They know what the problems are. They're facing them every day. So how do we tap into that and enable them to try things out? And I guess across all of this, there's no shortcuts or easy ways to do this. So a lot of it is about actually getting in there and facilitating some of those relationships. And that's really difficult to kind of quantify and put a finger on, but has been the thing that's made the difference for us.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Louise, over to you.
We've worked with Nesta for a couple of years on things from hospital discharge, admission avoidance, and into our development of neighbourhood models of care. Interestingly, I hadn't heard what Dan had to say, coming from Essex as well. But for me, what I've learnt most is that people are our biggest asset. And what our role is really to create the right environment for people to make change happen and make it stick. Where we've brought people together, and I'm really carefully using the word people, not staff, not patients, because it's everybody, bringing everybody together, and got them to focus on either sort of patient experience or their own working environment. You will be absolutely amazed at what can be achieved with very little resource, because your people have the ideas, the skills, and they're the ones that can make change happen.
Great. Matthew.
Am I on? Yeah. So reflecting on the question, I think for me, we're not having the right conversations. We have to create the right time, the right space to have a different type of conversation across a system, across a community with a person. So we're all leaders as well. So leadership is key. We need a different type of leadership. We have to, I think, absolutely have those enablers. So the technological conversation next door is critical. But I would also argue we need to have an emotional infrastructure, and we have to invest in that. And I think, as you say, if you invest in that, then I think we've got a better chance of it sticking. And then just a challenge, do we want it to stick? You know, don't we want it to spread and slide and be messy? Because that's the reality. This is a complex adaptive system. You're all leaders in that. So I think it's about, let's have more conversations. And where's the power? The power's in the energy. There's energy in this room. And, you know, we've got to find a way of building that energy and maintaining it within ourselves. And don't forget ourselves, because that's really important. Because without us, it won't stick and it won't get messy. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Rich.
It's difficult going last, Catherine. So I think there are, in terms of making people-powered change stick, there are limits, I think, to the progress that can be made from hard levers, from policy, from guidance, from regulations. They only take you so far. And policymakers and commissioners and providers, people with lived experience, are not necessarily motivated by the latest guidance, the latest regs, or by efficiencies in the system. Because they're people, as has been said, they're motivated probably by good relationships. They're motivated by being happy. They're motivated by having positive contacts with people and seeing the difference that their work and their contribution makes. So my reflection on how to make people-powered change stick is, from working across integrated personal commissioning and personal health budgets, is where people can come together as people, rather than thinking about the particular roles that they bring, and directly experiencing and personally contacting other people and having relationships and the chance to be happy with each other. That's the kind of thing that makes it stick. And a great example is in Essex, there was a direct payment support group, and the people that used it just wanted to keep it to themselves. They didn't want any officers or social workers to come along. But we managed to open it up so that people could come in together and share the different perspectives that they had, not as professionals or as service users, but as people. And so for me, making people power change stick is around moving beyond our protective labels that we give ourselves and being able to express our common bond, really, as people.
Great, thanks, Rich. This time I mean it. Last but not least, Jo.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of sitting down, if that's okay with you. Because I can't stand up with these glasses on, they're very new. Thinking, only having a minute really helps focus the mind. Yeah. So I thought I'd just take my minute to talk about power, because we know one of the things that stops change sticking is that people and big organisations have a tendency to want to hold on to their power. But more recently, we have started to think about how we share power, and I've certainly had direct experience of that within my role at NHS England as somebody with lived experience, and more broadly throughout the programme. But when we talk about sharing power and working in equal partnership with people to improve health and social care services, we often think about power as something we can give away. So I'm a professional and I'm very happy to share some of my power and I'm going to give it to you. But one of the things I don't think we pay enough attention to is actually it's a two-way process, and it really relies on people wanting to pick it up and people feeling they have the necessary knowledge, skills and confidence to become an effective change agent. And this process doesn't just happen. It really needs to be facilitated, it needs to be nurtured, and it really requires the investment of time, energy and commitment. Basically, in a nutshell, I think we really need to intentionally empower people if we want people-powered change to stick.
Amazing. Can we give everyone a round of applause? I think it's really interesting to see, some really clear common themes actually that were emerging between what each of you were saying. So the idea of permission, the idea of energy coming up and how we maintain energy, the importance of language, recognising something, this isn't, you click your fingers and it happens. So we want to pause for a few minutes and just, if I can invite you just to sort of turn to the immediate gathering of 2, 3, 4 people that are around you, just to do a bit of a reflection, what stood out for you, what are the questions that you want to pose, what are the challenges you want to make to what you've heard. We'll do that for about sort of 5 to 10 minutes-ish, and then we'll open up into a broader conversation, okay?
But we're going to hand it over to you guys now to kind of pose a question to either some of the speakers or other people in the room. Does anyone feel brave enough to go first? And I know there's a great question over here.
Thank you.
Hi, I've been given permission to be a friendly antagonist.
We like friendly antagonists.
My name's Mandy. I'm a carer for my son who has cystic fibrosis. And my claim to fame is that he's had over 200 appointments in the last 10 years. My point about this is that events like this could be far more co-produced. If we're going to get people-powered change to stick, we've got to really be much braver and think about how to do things a lot differently. So in the introduction, most people were directors or senior leaders. I think, Jo, you're a carer, is that right? Sorry, okay. So I kind of feel the balance of power is still in favour of people with the power. So I'd like you to ask yourselves really how to not do that and how to change that and how to do this event differently if you do it again some other time.
And I think that's it's a great challenge back to kind of us and Nesta, yep. And I completely agree with you. But I also think it's a challenge back to the system as a whole, because I think what you've said applies to how care is delivered generally. And I know, Jo, I'm sure you've got a perspective on that, maybe, yes, that you might want to share. But, it's a challenge for you, Matthew and Chris, and I think everyone in this room that has a role to play in helping to create the conditions for co-production to happen properly.
And just before we kind of do a bit of response, recognising we're not going to have heaps of time for questions, has anyone got a question along the same lines of that they would like to get in? Yes.
Fiona.
Ah, Fiona. I'm sorry. They are spongy.
It seems to me there's quite a lot of Emperor's New Clothes-y stuff going on. So inside systems there are loads of people who know it's not working, and some people can be really quite specific about what it is that isn't working and have loads of ideas for what could change, but very few people are saying that. So my question is, how do we empower all those little boys in the Emperor's New Clothes parable to say, the Emperor's got no clothes on?
Yeah.
How do we do that empowering? And it is, I think, linked to that.
We've got a couple more here, and then maybe we'll ask some responses from some of our speakers. Do you guys want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Greg Watson. I work for an organisation called the Ideas Hub, and we share, I guess, the stories of people working with people-powered approaches. What we've found is that people have shared their stories, but we ask them kind of, what have you learned from your mistakes? And people are hesitant to kind of share those experiences. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of the learning that people are taking from their people-powered kind of projects, they're kind of not being shared because people are afraid to own up to the fact they might have made mistakes or things haven't been as successful as they could be. Completely justifiably, at the risk of losing funding or appearing to lose credibility, but also there's really crucial learning there that's slipping through the cracks. So how can we encourage people to be brave, is my question.
And it feels spot on, because I think, as to your point, there is so much learning about the stuff that doesn't quite work to avoid people making the same mistake again to you. And then we'll maybe ask for some responses from...
Hi, great. Well, this is our question. Yeah, I'm just interested more in the social inclusion aspects. We focus a lot on disability. I myself am disabled, but I'm really interested in the whole inclusive attitude and how are we actually going to reach these groups that are always hard to reach, and how we're going to get them involved. People who don't have, new technology, people who live in remote areas, people who just do not engage with any programs like this. How are we going to reach those? Because they're the people who are using a lot of the resources.
So our speakers, I'll come back for some more questions, but I might ask them some initial responses from maybe Chris, Louise, Matthew, Gemma, Joe. Chris, yeah.
So the initial point about stronger co-production, I couldn't agree more, and it's something we're rankling with in Tameside. It'd be very easy for me to sit in my office in the hospital and write a strategy that would be very palatable for my colleagues in the Acute Trust and the CCG and other parts of the system about how we are going to empower people. But the reality is that won't work. This isn't about the system empowering people. This is about the system, communities, members of the public, voluntary and community sector, commercial sector organisations, recognising that we have a shared challenge. And that challenge is that we have a health and care system that is no longer fit for the population that it's trying to serve. And in actual fact, we have to solve that problem together. So it isn't my role as a strategy person in an acute trust to inform people how we're going to do that. It's my role to try and create the space for other people to do that alongside me. So to just very briefly give a tangible example, locally in Tameside, we've given a small amount of money to our infrastructure body to bring together the voluntary providers, patients groups, members of the public, counsellors, and to invite us into their space to co-design a strategy around people-powered approaches, to then lead on to a call to action, not a call to action to the system, not them holding us to account and challenging us, but actually a collective ownership of the problem, some agreement around some common outcomes, and then trying to simultaneously pull in the right direction. I'll leave the Emperor's New Clothes and nudity one to other people.
I think Matthew, Gemma, I know Gemma, you...
Is it working? Yeah, thank you for the challenge. It comes back, I think we need to have a different conversation and we need to listen. We need to be fully engaged, truly fully engaged, and be authentic about the challenges we face as people within communities, not necessarily as professionals, which are there as well. And I think that's part of the problem. Professionals, the workforce is exhausted. The energy is really finite, and that's where we have to tap into the energy that does exist within community VCSE. So in Somerset, we're working with Richmond Group, trying to think about how do we do things differently, how do we listen, and it's going to take time. That's the reality as well. This is a change process, and I think quality and equality need to be absolutely in the same expression. So yeah, we're very, very switched on about quality improvement, but what about inequality? And we have to be able to fail safely fast. And, you know, that's got to be something that teams are allowed and the leadership that wraps around them to do. So, you know, it's in the gift of everyone in this room to support that. And I say just keep challenging each other and be able to talk freely and learn.
Gemma.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to kind of add as well. It's around identifying the appropriate leadership and actually maybe who's best to do that. And I think we're really looking in Stockton as part of the Integrated Personal Commissioning demonstrator sites. There's 19 of them, and we're the only one in the country that the Voluntary Community Centre is actually project managing and leading this national programme across you know, the area, and it's a very different approach, it's very different relationships. It's actually CCG, local authorities, foundation trusts holding their hands up and saying, actually, we're not the experts around some of this work. We shouldn't be leading some of this. We should be letting other people lead it. And actually, we trust our partners and we have that relationship to work together. So I think it's thinking slightly differently as well around where that leadership sits and comes from.
Completely.
So I just wanted to say something about context, and I think the context in which you're trying to co-produce something differs, and what needs to happen differs. So I appreciate that for an event, it is very different than co-producing a programme. So I just want to sort of move over to co-producing a programme, because I think what the IPC programme has demonstrated is actually, even within a big bureaucratic organisation, it is possible if you invest the necessary resource and the necessary time, because throughout the programme, what that's enabled to happen is that we've very much moved to a position of working collaboratively. We've moved away from a them and us to everybody working as colleagues, to having people, the voices of people with lived experience woven throughout the programme. So 3 places on the programme board, people operating at a national level, sort of moving towards the regions. So we've now appointed 5 lived experience advisors for the regions. So with a very strategic approach and a thought through approach that has really invested in people. So we run various different academies to enable people to be empowered with the knowledge that they're going to need, that it is absolutely possible even to do that within a big organisation. It just takes the commitment and the time and the leadership.
Any other immediate reflections, or shall we open up for another round of questions? Can I?
If you're asking clinicians to turn their hand to a new set of skills, because you know, if I had my head of marketing here, she would instantly put herself into the shoes of the recipient and co-design the services with the population. I wonder if we're asking clinicians to do too much. Just a thought.
Possibly. We've got a question here as well.
This is an observation, not a question. It's a message from those of us who were around drafting the NHS plan in 2000. I'm just going to do this in bullet points. Board leadership, you need one person on the board who is accountable and responsible for implementing people-powered health. You need to involve trade unions in the internal leadership of people-powered health, as well as the professional organisations. You've had at least one member of the BMA and the Royal College of General Practitioners speaking. You need the support staff to have a voice. The objective is to get into the DNA of the organisations. It takes time, skill, competence, and being a patient in a political sense, not in a clinical sense.
Great, thank you. I might come to a combination of Katie and Rich in a minute to respond to some of that, but we've got a question over here and another one over here. I won't throw it, don't worry. Maybe
just speaking to this. Yeah. My name's Phil Owen. I'm a governor of a hospital in London. I say that because I may be a little critical sometimes of the hospital I am a governor in, so I better be careful.
You're being filmed, I should say.
Yeah, right. One of the things that, I mean, it's been sad for me to hear that everything has been talked about in terms of the people who make things run in a hospital system and a national health system, but nobody's mentioned governors. Governors have a tremendous capability which they bring to the table, which is very, very rarely recognized and is very rarely sort of considered even by some of the executives and some of the board. And to give you some examples, I, for instance, in this hospital formed a volunteer organization, which was then taken over by the trust. We were asked also to see whether we could have a look at raising morale in the wards, and I thought that one of those problems was a question of looking at nurses' residences, for which there are very, very few places in the whole of London to sort of offer a combined area for nurses where they could all get together, share ideas, share problems, and raise their own morale in the wards. And good morale amongst nurses means good morale amongst patients. The other is that meeting in the community, we're not paid to go out and organize meetings in the community. And so what I've done is I've tried to approach the CCGs. Now I know that Salford does in fact work very closely with the CCGs. The CCGs in our area, I hate to say, are extremely protective. They will not work with us. And they have the money. We don't have the money to go out and talk and raise money to essentially have meetings in the community, renting town hall areas, renting libraries. So how do we actually engage with the communities? And how do we actually then go and get members to elect our governors as well? And so it's a vicious circle. And I think that's something which we should be engaged in and sort of asked to contribute to, because I think we can bring quite a lot to the party.
Great.
Great, thank you.
So we've got a question here, and then I might ask some responses, particularly maybe you, Louise, from a CCG perspective.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Grant. I'm the guy that's going to be out of business quite soon, one of the junior doctors.
Someone give them some
from what they said earlier. I just thought a reflection on the last few points, just something that I've been thinking for a while, and that is, you know, it seems like the role of a doctor should really change. You know, as I work in a hospital, frontline, seeing patients, I want to be able to point them in this direction and tailor their care to them. But I'm not able to do that. I spend 95% of my time for a patient on the computer and not with the patient. I don't have time to sit down with them. I treat them like patients and not people. And they're thrown into guidelines and protocols. And that's from the top down. And right the way from when you're selected for med school, with what they're looking for and how med school is delivered. And then when you become a doctor, it all points away from treating people like humans. And being a doctor is one of the most dehumanizing jobs I've done, and that's just wrong. And it's a reflection more than a question, but should something be done about the way that we train doctors, and should that role change? I think it needs to, fast.
And I love the fact someone give him a hug at the end. He definitely needs it. But you know, it's the overarching question is actually how do we make the system enable you to do what you want to do and need to do. So there's been some questions over leadership, governance, priorities as well. So maybe I might go to Katie and Rich, and then to you, Louise, for some initial responses, and then I will.
There is an example of it happening. So
and we're almost out of time as well, so we might have to continue the discussion after as well. But Katie, Rich.
I guess with the leadership question, on the 100-day challenges that we've undertaken, everyone has really clear responsibilities about what their role is and their role in giving the permission. That starts with kind of what NHS England's role is and what we have to be responsible for, and we have to deliver on them what we say we're going to do, empowering the leaders there and giving them the confidence to them hand the permission down. So I think everyone has to be accountable for the roles that they're being given. And there was a question around, well, do the clinicians have the capacity to do some of the things we're asking them to do? Actually, if everyone's doing the job that they need to do, they then have the space and more capacity to do the things that they want to do. And I think we've had clinicians say, I just don't have time to talk to patients in that way. But then when you get different people in a room having a different kind of conversation, they find that there are different ways of doing some of that. And that we've been doing that on a fairly small scale with some of the 100-day challenges, but by having really clear roles for everyone and everyone stepping into the leadership and giving that permission, it has enabled things to be done differently, to give people a bit more capacity to do the things they want to do.
Thanks. Rich.
I had a couple of points. I really like the point about the Emperor's New Clothes. I often joke that the Wizard of Oz, it turns out, is just a really angry old white man behind a curtain, and there's something similar, I think, within often the NHS. So the two points that I wanted to make were
We'll cut that bit out. If you want, it's entirely up to you.
actually about roles and identities, and it kind of comes to the governor's point. I suspect quite a lot of the people in this room actually have lots of different identities and different roles, and they can bring those perspectives. And we're kind of people who have moved in and out of the system. We've worked formally in it. We've worked outside, kind of, lobbying it, and like Sally Witcher was saying earlier. So there's something about knowing what roles that we have, and that. And then the other challenge, and this came up from our discussion actually, was, what if we made all of this stuff that we're really interested in, what if it did stick? Because systems and government and others have got this really good habit of appropriating stuff that we know works really, really well. And you might need to edit this out as well, but kind of bastardize it, so that you kind of compromise it so that it isn't the model that you originally started off with. So is that okay? Does that constitute success? Or if it's not the pure model, is it a failure? And I think that's it's a big challenge for us on this side as well as people on the inside. Yep.
So Louise, from Commissioner's perspective, both council and health, I guess you can share.
So we worked really hard in all of our initiatives to try to make sure that we had the right representation throughout. So, partners, all partners in the system were there, were part of our teams, and partners included our patients so that they had a voice. And one person in particular, who's John, held us to account all the time. He held the leadership to account. At the end of our sessions, he was saying to the leaders, you've heard what your staff saying is wrong with your system. You need to give them the flexibility, the freedom to go away and make these things change. And that was really, really powerful for us. And throughout it all as well, we spoke to patients, even though the patients might not necessarily have been part of the project teams. We took time to go and talk to them. And, I just want to leave you with one really simple thing. And one of our teams decided that one of the targets they wanted to achieve was to discharge more people in the morning to try to help our flow through the system. But when they spoke to staff were almost killing people with kindness. They wanted to wrap them up. They were saying people don't want to go home in the morning. They want to have a hot meal before they go home because they're worried about no food in the fridge when they get there. That was the belief. And what they did was they went and spoke to everybody on the ward. And what did people say? They said, I want to go home in the morning when I feel best, when I know that actually if I need something in the afternoon, somebody will be there for us. And then being able to communicate that message to all of the teams. So, to the staff that are cleaning the wards, to say to them, things are going to change, and they're going to change because our patients are telling us that they're the ones that want to go home. And I think when we got those sorts of stories, that's what's really helped us to make things stick.
Great, thank you. We are on final thought, and then I'm going to try and wrap up because we're out of time and everyone's waving at me to say stop.
We talk about roles and we have talked about engaging patients. I work for a network of patient group in GP practices in Lambeth. And I think one of the things that when I go out and talk to people in patient groups, one of the things that you have to deliver that message is they are a partner to be able to effect those changes, and they don't understand that because information are not available out there. They don't have the knowledge. They don't even know all the changes that's happening in the healthcare that's surrounding them. So without information, they don't have that power. They don't know what they need to be contributing, and they don't know actually what can they do in order to work with the high powers, those people who's got structure, very clear role, resources to do those things. We don't. We work with patient group who are volunteers in the community. They don't have the leadership training. Lots of money has been invested in developing leadership because of the transformation, but none of that actually gone to patients. We haven't developed patient leadership in the community. We talk about the voluntary sector. They are also suffering because of the cuts in the local authorities. So I think when we talk, I really like what's been said earlier. We need to treat patients as a partner, but not somebody that you consult and talk to and have conversation. They are your partner. They have a lot of access and they have a lot of things that they can contribute towards the agenda. And you need to treat them as partners, not just somebody that, you know, you have a conversation and be part of that. They need to be there from the start, and you need to invest in them to, you know, for them to be able to participate that way.
I agree. And to the point before, it takes time, effort, resources. But I think the thing that we're going to have to wrap up now, unfortunately, but it feels like it's a conversation we could continue for a good 2 days if we had the time and space, but I guess we don't, unfortunately, this afternoon. But I guess a final thought from Catherine and myself is there is something interesting about those 150 people in this room that are all committed to the same types of changes and shifts within their local communities, within their systems. But I guess we tend to look to others to create the conditions or make the shifts happen. But I guess there's something quite interesting about actually what can we do to continue to challenge the status quo in some way. But to your point, Matthew, a lot of this is messy and slightly chaotic, and we have to kind of embrace that and learn by doing and iterating, and not be afraid, to the gentleman over there, the point of actually how do we start to tell the stories of stuff that works but also doesn't work, because that is as powerful and important. But we've got used to, I think, as a health system, sweeping the bad stuff under the carpet because we don't like failing, we don't like to talk about it, but we need to be comfortable in surfacing that and learning from it and building on it. Final thought from you, Catherine.
Yeah, I think I'm going to come back to something you said, Matthew, actually, during your 1 minute, which was energy and maintaining the energy and recognising actually trying to make this sort of change where there's a sort of, I guess there's often a sense of swimming against the tide, and it's, you know, it takes it out of people to try and maintain the energy and keep pushing and persevering to achieve this sort of stuff. And I think your point was something along the lines of, actually, it's really important to connect to and maintain these sorts of forums when you can have open conversation and you can have, you know, really great challenge around, well, actually, are you thinking about this in the right way? And I suppose at Nesta Health Lab, we're really interested in actually what are the sorts of forums that help to facilitate this conversation. So today was a bit of an experiment of actually what's it like when we bring all sorts of different people together. So please do come and find myself or Dan kind of during the breaks, during the networking at the end, if you've got any thoughts of, you know, what worked well, actually how we could kind of keep convening and take this network forward, because we would love to hear from you. So thank you.
Well.